We're about to come out of winter, spring is approaching, and we can see the first buds on the trees. It's March, and this is really when the season is starting up again. The apricot tree is completely in bloom, the temperatures are starting to rise, so it's the time to do the sowing in seed trays, like this one, for example. So these are cabbage seedlings, white cabbage, which are beautiful. We'll transplant them outside next. We also have leeks. So these are vegetables that grow in fairly cool temperatures. And we're going to transplant all of that into the garden soon. Vegetables need a lot of heat and water. That's why we start most of the sowing, rather as spring approaches and even when spring has really started. Here I'm lucky to have a greenhouse. It's a bioclimatic greenhouse, a cold greenhouse, but it stores the sun's heat thanks to the wall that acts as thermal mass. I gain 5-6 degrees compared to the outside, which allows me to sow earlier in the year. The greenhouse is kept frost-free, which is very important because it can get down to minus 10 degrees here. We're in a sunken area. It's already been minus 10 degrees outside. And inside it's 1 degrees. So we keep the greenhouse warm. That's really important because otherwise nothing grows. Very quickly, as soon as there's a ray of sunshine, the temperature goes up here. For germination to go well, it needs to be at least 14, 15, or even 16 degrees. Sometimes for certain vegetables, it's 20 degrees C. And then this week, next week, and throughout March, and even into April, we're going to be sowing summer vegetables. So tomatoes, but we're really going to pamper them. We're going to put them in a warm spot, so under the greenhouse, close to the wall, on seedling tables like this one. We protect them with a winter cover. The sun heats the wall during the day, and the heat is released in the evening. There's a microclimate here that allows us to sow a bit earlier, and being obviously super well exposed to the sun since we're facing directly south, if there's a greenhouse, you have to sow later. The risks of sowing too early are indeed late frosts, so you absolutely need a greenhouse to protect those seedlings. What's important for sowing is a good substrate. I buy organic potting soil with the necessary nutrients for the development of young plant shoots. I can do direct sowing in the ground, right on the soil, or sowing in seed trays like this one. And that's handy because quickly we can sow a lot of vegetables. And then we're going to transplant. And the benefit of doing this is that when we water them, there's uniformity in the watering. It's much more convenient for keeping track. Make sure the substrate is always moist enough, sunny enough too, and in a warm enough spot. By the way, last year we had late frosts. We had to redo a lot of our tomato and cucumber seedlings. It wasn't under that greenhouse, a cold greenhouse too, but not with the thermal mass that I have here, which is the wall. When it froze outside, it froze inside too. It was really cold. Since I do direct sales of vegetable baskets, ideally, I aim to have tomatoes as early as possible. Well, we're in Versailles, north of the Loire, and the sunlight isn't really ideal for vegetables like tomatoes, but my goal is to have tomatoes as early as possible. Ideally, late June, early July. I don't heat my greenhouse. It's not easy at all, but because of that, I'm taking a gamble, meaning I'm going to sow my tomatoes really early. Last year, I sowed my tomatoes at the end of February, except that there were late frosts and I lost my tomatoes. So I had to redo a minimum wage. So I'm waiting because I don't want to make the same mistakes, and there's no point in sowing too early. So let's see how it turns out. At first, I really thought I could sow very early. And actually, I think it's not that relevant because the weather is so unpredictable, it can still get really cold. I can't control the climate in the sense that I don't heat my greenhouse. It's okay, I'll sow a little later. So now we're going to sow the tomatoes and cucumbers and all the other seedlings too. Right now it's still early March. Protecting cold, use greenhouse. Seeds cheap, replant. And if we really see a big cold snap coming, we'll protect them even more, maybe putting them back under a greenhouse inside the greenhouse. The seeds aren't very expensive, and we'll just do them again. And too bad I won't be selling tomatoes at the beginning of July. Last year, I actually got my first tomatoes really at the very end of July, beginning of August, when everyone goes on vacation.